Hello and welcome back to Joe's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical with me, your host and resident art historian, Joe McLaughlin. Welcome back, and I'm really excited today to bring you a very special two-part episode all about land art. Now, land art, for those of you who may not know, is a very important movement within the history of art and indeed art itself, and it sees artists incorporate the earth and environment within their practice, and is a movement that emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. It's largely associated with Great Britain and the United States, but as you will see, many European artists also got involved within the movement. This week I'm joined by the brilliant art historian Liuka Jonynaite, who talks us through two iconic land artists, Walter de Maria and Michael Heizer. Before we hit record, I'll be very honest and say I had never actually come across either artist, but since researching and speaking with Liuka, she's inspired me to learn more about both of these land artists, who very much stretched their practice across the United States and Europe. We discuss pushing the boundaries of land art, why it's an important movement, what it means to create something which is only ever meant to be temporary, why photography is such an important aspect to land art, and what we can learn about ourselves from making something that is only ever meant to be temporary. Part 1 will see us take a deep dive into two works by Walter de Maria, Earth Room, which was first displayed in Munich and then again in New York, and Walter de Maria's Mile Long drawing. Part 2 will see Liuka and I discuss Michael Heiser's two very important works, Double Negative and Munich Depression. Essentially what's happened is the conversation with Liuka was just so great, I didn't want to cut anything out, and I didn't also want to give you a podcast episode that was 2.5 hours long, so I've split them into two sections. So I really hope you enjoy listening as much as I did recording and listening back as well. So sit back and relax for part 1 as Liuka and I discuss Walter de Maria.
But for people that perhaps have never heard of land art or don't really know what it is, could you maybe very briefly explain? I mean, it's a big question, of course. What is land art?
Okay, wow, yeah, this is a really big question actually, because there are, as you can imagine, there are a lot of debates in kind of art historical, a circle of what is land art, like what defines land art in terms of this specific, definition. So basically, it is, I would say very simply, it is an art movement that was kind of like, it wasn't, people who were involved in it did not name themselves as land artists. They kind of just were like a group of friends who in 1970s primarily in America, in the United States, who just kind of went to wild locations and into the wilderness and did some artworks in the land with the land.
It's so interesting. Can you remember the first time that you came across land art? Were you at university? Were you at school?
The first time was actually in the university and quite late in my studies. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, it was a time I was studying, but actually as I kind of try to recall right now, I understand it was actually not in my studies, actually not in the university as a location, I was in one of the talks in my hometown in the art center called Rupert, and it was a talk about Anthropocene and aesthetics of Anthropocene. And then I don't remember who was talking, but this lady just kind of showed the slides, and one of the slides was the artwork by Agnes Dennis, called Wheat Field. And I just saw that artwork. It was basically a woman standing in the wheat field in the middle of New York. And yeah, you could see like the skyscrapers and everything, and she was standing in the wheat field, and that was the artwork. And I was really drawn to it. I thought, this is amazing. I really want to, you know, kind of understand this and look at it more. But yeah, and then kind of like down the line, I discovered that there's a certain movement called land art.
Yeah.
Even though Agnes Dennis wasn't involved in it, but it's kind
it's so interesting. So I had something similar in that I actually came across land art when I was in high school, but obviously I didn't know that's what it was called. And we were looking at, so we used to have art classes, obviously, like 4 or 5 times a week at school. And if you picked it as one of your subjects, you had it quite a lot. So I picked art as one of my subjects. Surprise, surprise, the art historian picked art. And one day a week, we used to do sort of art theory, where you were essentially like handed a book and you were like told to look through it, and then you could like read about art, but it wasn't pitched as like art history. It didn't sort of twig to me that that's what this was. And I came across Andy Goldsworthy, who is a British land artist, and he's really known for using the first one that I came across was this sort of spiral of leaves that he'd placed together, but he'd found all these leaves, you know, in autumn, and when you have all these really sort of beautiful sort of gradients of like reds and pinks and oranges, and he had arranged them in this spiral at the base of a tree by their gradient going from light to dark. And I just thought it was a really interesting thing, and I actually went home and tried to do it in my garden. So I was like maybe 14 or 15, and I don't know, just really remembering trying to place all these, like try to get leaves and sort of place them together into a pattern. But obviously, because it's outside, which is something I think people just tend to forget when they see these things. And obviously I was in Scotland, which famously the weather is awful. It just blew away instantly. And then I was like, oh my God, how has he done that? How has he managed to get the works together in a way that it stayed long enough that you could even like take a photo? And this wasn't in the days where everyone had an iPhone and you could like take an image instantly. But anyway, sort of going way off. And so that's always kind of stuck with me. So when we started talking and you were like, oh, I really like land art, I was like, oh, here we go. This is great. And you've sent me 2 really interesting guys who I have never come across. And I think this is going to be an interesting episode because one of them I love. This Walter Di Maria, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is right up my street. I really love this. And then Michael Heizer, who we're also going to talk about, he leaves me a little bit cold, and I don't really know how I feel about him. But it's one of these things where these are 2, like the artists that you've picked, I just think are brilliant examples of why it's really important to look again. And you can so easily look at these works and be like, that's stupid, what's the point, let's move on with my life. But
exactly, yeah.
But I've really enjoyed, in like preparation for this podcast, reading about them. But even how I've approached my research in this, it got to a stage where I was sort of like, it actually isn't even about sort of trying to pick apart the artist's idea behind these pieces. It's going to be more of like a debate, I feel, of like how you found it, because everyone that looks at these are going to take something different away from it. Would you agree?
Oh wow, definitely. I mean, I totally agree with you, because yesterday I was also like kind of recapping all the research information I have like at the moment on my laptop about them, and I realized actually, I mean, what really kind of irritated me doing research on them a lot of times is that like a lot of things are really difficult, like in their biographies, and kind of like difficult from 21st century perspective. You know, they both are white male kind of privileged artists from USA and everything, and it's kind of like to me always, but I've always been like very drawn to the artworks they created. So I kind of like this idea of approaching the artworks formally. You know, it is very important to talk about their biographies and where the artworks come from. You know, but it's not the end of of the debate, and I do totally agree that it is very interesting to see what people are making of it.
Yeah.
Because definitely, I mean, artist's intention, especially in this case, really, I would say like, say, maybe 20% of the what actually you can make of the artwork, you know? So I totally agree. And I just wanted to ask, how did you feel after I send you those images? And how did you, like, was it unexpected, you know, to see that this is land art in terms of, like, this is my interpretation of
Yeah.
what I want to talk about?
Brilliant question. So first of all, when you emailed me, I was like, whoa, she sent me loads of images here. And then I actually looked at sort of the Michael Heiser ones, and I was like, oh, this is a bit odd. And then when I saw the Walter Di Maria one, I was like, the earth room pieces, particularly the shot of him putting it in, sort of it being installed, I was like, this is not what I know as land art, or what I would what I've been exposed to in terms of land art. So my experience of land art is very much British. So Richard Long, Andy Goldsworthy, I would even argue David Nash in certain respects is very much a land artist, and how he sort of manipulates and uses the land around him to create sculpture and things like that. But so I was like, but then I saw they were like American, and I was like, okay. And it's something that American art history I'm not too familiar with, in the respect that, of course, I know sort of like, you know, the big sort of superstar names. But in terms of this, I found it really fascinating. And then when I started researching for this, everything very quickly fell into place. And then I understood exactly why, particularly for Michael Heizer, why you sent me so many images, because you need so many different views on it to really get a sense of these things, because Michael's work in particular is humongous. It's so big. And for one of them very much is temporary, because that's a recurring theme in land art. You know, it's this thing that, well, what I really like actually is that land art is supposed to be this thing that is temporary, and you know, it's there for a moment and then it's gone. But I don't know if this was intentional or not, but each artist, you've sent me one that has lasted and one that was temporary. So I think
exactly.
I think that was a really interesting thing to do, and particularly Walter Di Maria's one. I was like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. And that is, for me, when artworks like this crop up, this is like rabbit hole central for me. I could easily lose an hour and a half of my day just researching and reading and like watching videos relating to it. Yeah, so I thought it was one of these things. When you sent me the images, I was like, oh, this is different. I don't know any of this. But this is the whole point of, you know, and before we even sort of started recording the episode, we were talking about how different people, what land art means to different people. So I must say, I've had a very nice little morning sort of diving into this and really sort of starting to sort of pick apart but question myself. And I think this is why I love art, though, because it's the questions that I find really fun.
Wow, yeah, that is so true, Joe. And I was just wondering if we should just talk about the artworks a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Before it turns into a 45-minute episode of just you and I sort of debating back and forth. But anyway, okay, so who would you like to start with? The floor is yours.
Okay, no, so I think we can start with Walter Di Maria, because we just kind of both love him.
Yeah.
So basically, the artworks I send to Joe, so they're not the artworks, basically, they're the images of the artworks.
Yeah.
So to be very art historically correct. And they are, the first one is called Earth Room, which was made in Munich in Gallery Heiser Friedrich in 1968. And the other work I sent to her was the same artwork made in New York, called New York Earth Room, made in like a little bit like decades later. But basically the work contains soil filled in, like, basically filling the whole floor of the gallery space, and saying that this is a pure soil without any, things growing in it, and any kind of history. It was bought from the store. The soil was kind of laid on the gallery floor, and it was quite high up so that visitors couldn't actually go in the gallery. They should have like just stayed away and looked at the soil from the outside of the gallery, which is quite an interesting, thing to think about, that the visitors couldn't actually enter the gallery. They were kind of made to stay away. And the New York Earth Room is kind of like the similar thing. It just it is in New York City, and it's been made after this work, as a kind of, because it was successful in Munich, and he thought maybe I could do the same thing in New York, and it actually stayed forever in there. So I mean, if you ever go to New York, anyone, so they can actually see it, and so the soil is kind of just kept. I'm really like interested how the earth looks like at the moment, like, is it really old? Is it really, tough and I don't know,
dried or
Dry.
Well, that's it. It's so interesting. So the images that you sent, I just think are brilliant. And just to go back again with the whole idea of that the visitors weren't actually allowed in the space. I really love that sort of juxtaposition of the artwork manipulating the viewer's perception and sort of experience within the space, because here it's sort of the dominant thing that's sort of like, no, you can't come in. It's kind of almost like the land has reclaimed the city. And I just, this blows my mind. I love this. And when I read that it was still in New York, I was like, well, there's got to be reviews on it. So I'm going to leave a link to this in the show notes below. Some of the TripAdvisor reviews of the New York Earth Room, which is what this Walter de Maria work is called, the New York Earth Room, is hilarious. This one person's like, it's terrible. It's just a room full of soil, and you can't even use the toilet there. Like, how is that? How is that a review on the artwork? And it actually says I was directed to the Starbucks around the corner, and that toilet was broken. Like, come on, mate, that's not that's not a good review. Because obviously I went straight to the 1 stars, and I was like, here we go. Let's see what the real critics have to say. But some of them are just brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. So if you're looking for a good laugh here, hold on, let me see if I can get even just some of the titles. It's a little odd. It's a room full of soil. I don't know what I expected, but it was a room full of soil that I just absolutely love. Hold on, let me get.
Very interesting. Yeah, no, that's a brilliant idea. I've never thought of like reading reviews on what is it called?
Yeah, right. Okay, so one of the,
that's so interesting.
Is so good. So one of the titles is not as interesting as it sounds, and it doesn't sound very interesting.
Wow. Wow. No. Yeah. What do you think your reaction would be? I mean, it's a difficult thing to ask, but would you also be really disappointed in like just seeing the soil and be like, oh yeah, I've read it's just a room full of soil, and then I saw it,
Well, this is interesting because I was sort of like, I wonder how I would feel. And then it reminded me, and we said this before we started recording, it's drawn a lot of parallels for me anyway, of artists that I know in Britain. So this for me really reminds me of, and I'm probably going to get his name wrong now, it's an artist called Richard Wilson, and it's this incredible work called 50/20. And it's all about, it's essentially he just fills a room with oil, And that's all he does. He just fills a room completely, the whole floor is covered in oil. And it's the whole idea of you're not too sure how thick the oil is, or how thick, how deep it goes, why it's there. And it doesn't really make sense. But when you're in the space, it's more the idea of I don't know how it makes you feel when you're there, and the questions it makes you ask. And it's one of these artworks that spark a conversation, because land art is also very conceptual. It's more about the ideas than what it is, necessarily is about the materials that are used. It's not concerned with how it looks, so the aesthetic value of it or the materials that are used. It's more about the questions that it strikes. And there's a brilliant artsy article, actually, and I'll leave it in the show notes, and I'll send it to you as well after this if you haven't read it. And it's about this girl that's lived in New York for years, and she's heard about it, and then she had a little bit of time to kill, so she's gone along to see it. And she spoke to the attendant, because there's someone that's there every single day that's so essentially when you go to New York to see this work that's there, you're buzzed up and you're told, oh, come to the second floor, and you're not allowed to take photos of it because the artist has requested that you're not allowed to. You're just supposed to be there and experience it, which I really quite like, because you have that thing where everyone has to sort of, if you don't have a photo, it didn't happen sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's like you can't even, you have to experience it. You can't just take a photo and then pretend that you've been there,
And this girl was talking about how actually she starts talking to the attendant, and she's like, I mean, does anybody ever come up here? And the questions that she was asking, I was like, these are questions I get asked all the time as someone that works in a gallery. Like, are you not really bored sitting here? Does anyone actually ever engage with this? And then she goes on to say, and the attendant said, there's days we get over 300 people coming in to see this artwork. It's very rare that we don't have under 100 people. And she was the 100th person to go that day. And it was only like 2:00, and he was like, I know. He said it's a weird, because his job is essentially to like answer questions and tally the people that come in. But I don't know, it just, even people's perception, even the fact that it's doing something, it's curious enough that people are still continuing to go to it, because it's run by an art foundation that sort of keep the work going. But I loved it. I think it's one of these things that's a total slap in the face, and it really confuses people. And it's one of these ones that gets people really mad, because they're like, oh, what's the point? And then you're like, but why are you getting so mad? What, like, you need to pick that apart.
Exactly.
That's the point.
Yeah. Very interesting.
And this is what's, this is when I was, researching and reading, I could draw so many parallels to different things. And for that reason, I love it, because I think this is just one of these great sort of works of art, in my opinion, that not only start brilliant conversations, but everyone approaches it. It doesn't matter if you've got a top class education, or you know about the artist, or you don't know about the artist. You're going to come into that space and you're all going to ask similar questions, because there's nothing to prompt you. There's no wording on the walls. You're not handed a document when you go in. It's you and your feelings and how you react as a person to it. And I think that's an interesting thing. You don't need to have an art historical context to these things. How are you as a person right in this moment in time thinking and feeling about this thing? And I love that.
Wow, that's amazing. I really love your observations, because I feel like when you were talking, I started thinking about how would I, having studied these artists like for more than a year, how would I react to the artwork? And I feel like this is so completely true in terms of like they are trying to displace you. And not even like I imagine I could be thinking about the kind of knowledge I have, and could be thinking about all the kind of art historical details I could apply to the artwork, all the details I know, but also it would be just a shade, it would be like some sort of detachment from what the real experience is, because they are trying to, like, I feel like this work is trying to displace you in terms of like your maybe daily life, and probably just anything really, your kind of reality. And this is kind of like, it is very radical in terms of, if you think about this artwork in this way, and it is still very I think true about these works, that they can actually do it. And they're not like, they kind of like, even though they were created in a very specific historical time, which I can, if you want to, I can talk a little bit about, but like,
absolutely.
They still seem, relevant in terms of like, they still do their job, because in 1970s and 60, especially 68, when the original work was created, it was like a very contentious period, and people were thinking how to live alternative lives, because life was kind of difficult socially. And I mean, it's just very interesting to see how they can maybe reflect some of the issues we're having right now, unresolved issues, and kind of just by letting you escape the world you live in,
Well, that's it. And I think this is what this work does beautifully. And again, very much what Richard Wilson's piece does. And that used to be in the Saatchi Gallery in London. And it was in the basement. So you kind of had to really make a pilgrimage almost to kind of get there. It was completely cut off from everything else. It had its own floor. And this is what I like about this one as well. It's very similar. You have to be buzzed in. You have to sort of enter into its space. And it's the juxtaposition really that I love, of just this void of earth, and you've had to come up, with, your backpack and whatever, from a really busy sort of New York street. And the second that I saw that this was because I didn't initially see that it was a permanent work. It wasn't until a little bit of further reading that it was like, and then it's just stayed there, because it's continued this really interesting conversation, and it's taken over by the Dia Art Foundation, that I was like, this is amazing. Like, and I would have been really annoyed if I had gone to New York and not realized something like this was there, because I think it's just so interesting. So you said at the time, when this work was created, there was a bit of a sort of struggle, or a sort of a re-examining of how people live, because this is very much sort of, when people started to embrace minimalism in a way, that whole idea of I don't know, sort of decluttering your life.
Exactly. I mean, this is kind of like land art is considered like post-minimalism and anti-form movement. It is very linked to the social movements that were going on at the moment. Because like both Maria and Heiser, they are from a very specific area in the USA. It's California, and California used to be a very, how to say, like a place for subversive cultures, like hippie cultures and anti-militarist cultures and anti-government cultures and everything. And kind of like they both in their works have this idea of creating new worlds, or starting with the world, with like wiping out the world what we live in right now, and then creating something new. So that is why I think Walter de Maria created this earth room, saying there is nothing here. There is like, this soil represents nothing. It's just the soil. It has no objects on it. I think I will just try to quote what has been said in the title of the artwork in Friedrich Heiser gallery. It's the original title is like 50 cubic meters of level dirt, and the land show pure dirt, pure earth, pure land. And it has no object on it, no object in it, no markings on it, no nothing on it, nothing growing in it. So it's very much, there's nothing here, and you kind of, and this is not, I guess it might be seen as pessimistic, you know, because in the times when Vietnam War was happening, and people were kind of losing hope in all the ideologies in the world at that time in 1968. I don't know if you know, but like there were a lot of like student strikes in both in California, in Paris, in Czechoslovakia.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a very social uprising year, that like the specific year that this work was created. And they were basically in both sides of like of capitalist world and Soviet world. They were, students were striking against the regimes, against the kind of ideologies, you know. And it was that kind of realization that those ideologies don't work, and that means what works, you know, like what is, how do we organize our lives, like we need to. And it was very much about kind of wiping everything we created and starting from the start, you know, starting with a better world.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and also very interesting thing, I'm sorry if I'm talking a lot, but like
Not at all.
Yeah, a very interesting thing is the fact that this work was created in Munich. And at that time in post Second World War, Munich, located in the Western Germany, the city was very conservative. It was very much kind of suppressive towards kind of youth who wanted to partake in like left-wing politics, who wanted to kind of be very loud about fascistic, you know, movement that were still going on in the Germany, that like all the elite who were ruling in fascist, you know, times, they were still around in kind of in the government of Western Germany. And it was kind of like Munich was the epitome of the social kind of struggle, where you really wanted to kind of change it, kind of be more, I don't know, more open about their historical past. And then they had these conservative leaders, conservative party members. And also like Munich used to be a center of fascism, if you know and if you remember. So it was a kind of a very contentious city. And then when Walter de Maria came by the invitation of this very famous, I would say, art dealer, Friedrich Heisner, and he came to create, like, he was given a gallery to create anything. And then when he did, everyone, like, the reception was so, I would say, good. Like, people were really, in Munich, were really driven by the work. They understood that, oh wow, something is going on here. Like, something is, like, this empty earth, this empty soil represents something that we kind of like, something avant-garde, like this idea of escaping what we live in right now, this idea of a possibility, you know? So
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's so interesting though, because when I was sort of looking at this, I really couldn't find too much of it. Like it mentioned it had been in Munich, and I did think at the time, I was like, oh, post-World War, that's a very strange time. But art-wise in Germany, very, very interesting as well. But I really couldn't find very much on it. And so funny that the other artist that we're going to talk about a little bit later, one of his works were also based in Munich round about that time as well.
yeah.
And it wasn't until I read that, it was more when I looked at Michael Heizer, I was like, oh my gosh, how odd that it was in Munich at that time, like the 60s, 70s, really sort of, you know, strange time within the history of Germany, with all these sort of changes and sort of infrastructures happening, you know, like you said, the divide in Germany. Yeah, so interesting, so interesting. But I love that it spoke to people, and that, you know, you could maybe think, oh, in that moment people saw it as like a rebirth or a hope, or, you know, there is a chance to sort of level everything and start again. You can always, you know, clean slate sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I still even think now it still holds a similar message in that you can start again. There's a rebirth in it. There's, I don't know, there's possibility in it. It can be everything and nothing.
Exactly.
It could just be a room full of dirt, or it could be a room that you're like, we can grow from this, we can learn from this, does it speak about how we need to bring, you know, more you know, sort of green spaces into sort of an urban concrete jungle? You know, it's called a jungle, but it's not green. Why? Where's the, you know, that sort of juxtaposition to it? I feel this is going to be one that you and I could talk about for quite some time. So I would say to anyone that's never come across this, go and have a look at these images. I'll leave links in the show notes below as well to that Artsy article, as well as the reviews on TripAdvisor. I mean, just purely if you're looking for a good laugh, have a read through. Some of them are absolutely hilarious. I think let's move on to talk about the other Walter de Maria work that you sent me, which again, when I saw this, I was like, oh, I love this. And then when I started looking at the images, I was like, how on earth did you find just one to send me? Because there's so many brilliant images of the artist sort of interacting with his next work, Mile Long Drawing, which, oh, I just love.
Okay.
So for everyone listening, do you want to just sort of set the scene on what Mile Long Drawing is? And this is still the same artist. This is Walter de Maria.
Yeah. Okay. So just going back to the USA, you know, we've just been in Munich. So now this artwork is based in Nevada desert in the USA, which is like near California, I think. I'm not too sure, but so basically, around the time, both Heiser and Walter de Maria they really liked collaborating with together and going back home, because they both lived in New York, but they were from California, going back home and creating some works there. And so basically, this work was one of their experiments, one of them, Walter de Maria's experiments in the desert, and it depicts two lines in the desert. And the image I'm looking at and the image I sent to Joe is of the artist just lying on the floor between the between the two of the lines. And it is a very famous image because it was used as a cover for one of the artist movements actually happening in Italy, called Arte Povera. And this was used as a cover for Arte Povera catalog printed in the USA. So it is very interesting because Walter de Maria is also he has Italian roots, and he traveled a lot in Europe, and he had a lot of connections with different art movements going on in Europe, and also so this one is kind of really it is also very conceptual, and it does not really kind of reflect on the materiality of the earth. It's more about the space, you know, it's more about the lines and about the infinite kind of moment of just drawing the lines and then kind of showing how they look in juxtaposition of your own body in terms of this is infinite and I'm not, and this is art, you know. So yeah, it is very much also drawing on the lines of escaping what is the art world of the day, the New York, very limited and very, I would say, conservative in a way, art world of New York at that time. Also escaping the European art narrative, which was very prominent before the World Wars, but then it was kind of replaced by the New York art scene. And now they're doing something very much oh yeah, we're going away from everything and we're creating something very new. This is, land art, something unexpected. So
Yeah.
Well,
No, I love it. I just think it's such an interesting thing. And again, so unlike his last one that we spoke about, Mile Long Drawing was very much temporarily. It's no longer there, and I don't ever think it's been recreated. But you do have these incredible images from the artist of the piece, and I don't know. It's one of these things. When I look at it, I mean, what does it say to you when you look at it?
it just makes me kind of, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It just makes me kind of lost, lost in a good way. Like to dream about something that is just something that is here, like it is real, but also it's not something I've ever seen before, which is so nice. I don't know how to explain it, but this is real. This image was taken, but also it's something it has something so unreal about it. So this is kind of like what really maybe strikes me, and in a way, like I did want to know one thing about as you said, like this work has not remained intact, but this is very interesting because the images remained, and the land artist had a very difficult relationship with documentation, because a lot of times they said, no, you can't really photograph, as you said with Earth Room, you can't photograph the Earth Room, you have to go and like experience it. But also they created some works that are purely based on documentation. So as this one, it's kind of like, and also they set the camera and they framed it the way they wanted the viewer to look into the work, They very much curated your view on it. And this one is also, very much curated. You see the lines going parallel, but in the perspective, and then you see kind of a human body lying in between them. So it is a very, very much kind of curated view on the work, which is really interesting to me.
For me, when I saw this, so I read that this was actually one of the first times that Walter de Maria had created work out with a gallery context. And it was the first time he'd gone, or one of the first times he had gone and worked in the land in a very sort of temporary, sort of within a moment, if you will, very temporary. It's not meant to be here forever. It will be gone. And like you said, the photographs are incredible. How he sort of, and not just this one, how he interacts with the lines, how he's shot with them, where he sits. And I would say to anyone listening, go away and have a look at this, because there's so many incredible images of him, very powerful images of him. But it's more of the work for me is it speaks about, I don't know, man-made marks on the earth, and how we think we're going to leave a permanent mark, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It makes me think about personally the direction in which I'm going, and sometimes it comes to an abrupt end, and then you feel a little bit lost. And this is what I see when he's kind of like lying there at the end, where you've kind of come to the end of the road of something, and you just kind of have to lie down and accept it.
Wow.
And I don't know, there's something about when I saw that it was chalk, my first thing was, oh gosh, well, it must be the chalk that they use on sort of like football stadiums and things like that. So it was my thoughts were, how did they get it so straight? What was his process in making it that straight? Because in order to make a straight line in something like nature, you're trying to bring order into something that's completely out of your control, like nature. If you're trying to draw a straight line in something, think about it. If you try and draw a straight line without any aid on a bit of paper, it's never straight.
Exactly. Maybe it just appears to be straight. Maybe it's not straight. We can't even tell, because it's an image. It's a photograph.
Well, that's it. but it's more so, and this is why I think works like this, like you have to spend time with them. You have to look, and then you have to look again and question yourself. What do you think? How do you feel? What does it say to you? Because what it says to me, it might not say to you. And what you and I might agree on, someone listening could be like, that's a load of nonsense. It obviously means this. But I don't know, there's something about the straight line and trying to bring sort of order into something and to place your mark on something so much bigger than you. And I think that's what's really important as well, because you just have these two straight lines, and then it's this, you know, you go shoot off into the distance, and it's this desert, this incredibly huge desert, and it's just such a little insignificant mark that attention's been drawn to in comparison to everything else that's going on. I don't know. I think it's so interesting, and I love stuff like this because it makes my brain, the cogs really, really turn with stuff like this. And someone could be listening and being like, I think you're picking this apart way too much. And maybe we are, but I also think, why the hell not?
Exactly.
Like it's a fun conversation to have. And anyone listening that disagrees or agrees, I mean, please get in touch. I would love to know what you think when you're looking at these things, what these make you feel. And even if they make you feel angry, that's still a reaction, and it's made you feel angry. Why has it made you feel angry? That's the question you need to ask yourself. I just think, these are so interesting. Beautifully shot images as well. I mean, the whole series of things are really beautifully shot. Do we know, was this for an exhibition or anything like that? Or was this very much sort of, he'd been commissioned by somebody and he went out and...
No, I mean...
Do we know anything?
There were two exhibitions on land art called Earthworks in Duane Gallery in New York in 1968, just a week after the exhibition of Walter de Maria in Munich. It happened the week after, and it was like kind of like a seminal exhibition of Earthworks. They did, most of them did exhibit photographs of their work. But then there was one exhibition also in 1969 in Ithaca called Earthworks. Earth Art, yeah. So basically it was also like on the kind of the same movements that were going on. And these works were mostly created on the spot. But basically, this is a really good question, like where did they use it? And most of the time they did exhibit the images, you know, and they did, and kind of like, it was the whole idea that, oh yeah, you come to the gallery room and the work is not there. It is just like drawing you into those faraway spaces, you know, in the desert somewhere, thousands of miles away, and saying, and in that image you can see very much what is the opposite of the gallery space. You can see an artist trying to embrace the whole of the desert, as you said, like very beautifully. Like he actually just drawn the lines, but also you experience the whole desert through his artwork, you know, kind of like you experience the undefined nature of the desert, like the huge capacity of it, because like the lines, the very small lines drawn on the desert, they show that the desert itself is really huge, you know. So this is very interesting, how they exhibited, and also the way they exhibited the works brought some new aspects to it, you know.
Yeah. So I have to thank you, because I really had never heard of Walter de Maria, and he's kind of somebody that now I really want to go away and sort of spend time with his work. I think he's so interesting. But I feel we've also spent a lot of time sort of picking apart his pieces, and we still have one other artist and 2 works to go. So to save the podcast being about 4 hours long, I think now's a really great time to bring it to Michael Heizer, who is the other artists that you, again, have introduced me to today. So 2 brand new artists. And this is what I love about art history. You're always finding people. There's always, you can never know everything. And, you know it yourself, you're an art historian, you're always learning, you're always discovering people. And that's half the fun of it, actually, is there's still so many options and so many routes and people to discover and ways to sort of go down.
And there you have it. That is the end of part 1 of Jo's Art History Podcast 2-part special on land art. I really hope you've enjoyed Liuka and I discussing Walter de Maria. For me, I particularly loved looking at Walter's Earth Room, and I always find looking at reviews of exhibitions and people's comments of an exhibition incredibly helpful, but also pointing out how completely silly some people can be in what they look for in an exhibition, i.e. such as toilets and whatnot, and how that gives absolutely no bearing on an artist's creative output, but can have such an impact in terms of ratings and whatever else. I very much hope you've enjoyed part 1, and stick around because part 2 with Liuka, where we discuss Michael Heizer, is coming up right now.